And this is Eric Rollins, the constitutionalist. That's a mouthful even to this day. Here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. I am joined by a friend of mine, fellow admirer of the Constitution. And we're going to talk a little bit today about kind of the origins of the Constitution. You know, all of these ideas didn't just spring up, but it was the first time they were implemented in this unique way in a republic. Before they had democracies. Well, democracies have some real problems because there's mob rule. And with mob rule, that means that if you're in the minority, you don't have any rights anymore. So they wanted to find a way to limit government and give rights to everybody, whether you're in the majority position or the minority position. It's not like your rights disappear. You might still lose certain arguments because the majority still rules within or wins within the republic. For instance, that's why Trump, because he won, my liberal friends on the left, Trump won. That's why he gets to implement the policies that he is. That's why he got to make the choice on tariffs, border, how to deal with riots, you know, like the LA riots, whether we allow criminals that are parts of gangs and are here illegally to stay, which is what the Democrats want. So getting back to the origins of the Constitution, I am joined by Bill Scott. Welcome.
Hello. What Eric was just talking about is, I like to describe a democracy as five wolves
And good day, folks. This is Eric Rollins, the constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. Today, I will be talking with a good friend of mine, fellow constitutionalist, Bill Scott, and we're going to talk a little bit about the origins of the Constitution. You know, they took this blend of ideas, Western civilization ideas, and they, I think, really perfected it. Now, you could say, well, the Constitution's not working. That's because we're not following it. It's not like it's broken. It's that government, by its very nature, wants to grow and expand, and it's inefficient and not very good at what it does. Usually. You might make some arguments that you could find a few examples where they do a good job, but generally I think they pay people more money than the private sector for less results. So the idea that we took this blend of ideas and perfected the idea, by that I mean we came up with a republic. We're not a democracy. Don't kid yourself. We're mildly a sort of a democracy, but I even hate to say that, a form of democracy. I hate to say that because I think a republic is unique in that it enshrines the rights of everyone, whether you won and you're in the majority or you're lost and you're in the minority. You don't lose your rights, though those rights only apply to citizens. And you get some of them if you're here legally. From my perspective, while we should be humane, you don't really get much of any of them if you're here illegally. Bill, welcome.
Welcome, or thank you. I just want to add what you said about democracy. I like to describe it as five wolves and three chickens voting on what they're going to have for dinner tonight. Well, the majority wins, so the chickens lose.
And in a democracy, not only do they lose, their dinner.
Exactly. They're gone. No rights. That's the difference between a republic. Everybody has rights. Now, the government can do what the majority wants up to the point of taking somebody else's rights. And there can be questions as to what those rights are, as we've seen some of the things that have happened with Trump since he started doing what the majority of the people wanted. It ends up in the courts. And sometimes he wins, most of the time he wins, but sometimes he loses. And that's what makes us different from a democracy. It's not just what everybody in the majority wants, they get everything they want. You still have to deal with individuals' rights.
Well,
In the case of the wolves and the chickens have rights, and the wolves can't just take their right to life away from them.
oh, I'd say that's absolutely right. So I've listened to you do some of this speech before, or not quite a speech, but this talk. Where do you want to start? How far back we going?
Well, you can keep
Jump
going
in your
back.
time machine. Let's go.
Yeah, you can keep going back, but generally, the fall of the Roman Empire, okay, before they came into Europe, I don't imagine that most of the people that lived here were much different than what they found on, the Western continents, North America and South America. There would probably be some fairly advanced civilizations, but most people weren't. And of course, when they came in and took over, the people they took over didn't like it. There was a lot of death, a lot of rape, a lot of pillaging, and
Colonizers have been happening forever.
yes. But after a few generations, when a more advanced civilization comes in, things change for the better. And several generations after the initial conquest, they realize that. A very simple example is next time you go take a trip north on 99 and you cross the San Joaquin River, take a look at the river, what it takes to get across it if you didn't have a bridge there. That's one of the things the pioneers had to deal with. If they were crossing, say, with a covered wagon, you'd come to one of these rivers, there'd be palisades on both sides, steep cliffs. And you had to figure out some way to get all the animals, all the wagons, all the equipment, and all the people down that cliff. Then when you came to the river, depends on whether it was, shallow and slow moving or deep and fast moving. That could be another object to deal with just to get across the water. And then when you got to the other side, you had to go up the cliff again. So it could take a week to get a wagon train across the river. And this is why you see a lot of countries' borders are based on rivers. It's an easy defense against somebody who's trying to invade you. As they're trying to come across the river, with all the effort it takes to do that, a lighter force can stop them. And the Romans were very good at building bridges across these rivers, to where it wasn't a big problem to go across. It changed the way warfare and commerce would happen.
So they could move troops in a quick manner to wherever was needed.
And goods. Okay, so that's just a simple example. Some of the ways they constructed buildings got scattered around Europe, and people began to learn a different, better way of life. Well, when Rome collapsed, it left a lot of people without direction, and it was just a free for all. And whoever was the strongest guy would take over this piece of land and that piece of land, and over a few hundred years.
That's normal for history.
Yeah, exactly.
The idea that people have rights, that whole concept,
yes,
is relatively new. Rome brought citizens had rights. Now, they weren't quite as we define them now, but citizens had rights. And that was one of the first times for that concept.
Yes. And it was just, this is why they call it the Dark Ages. One of the big things, too, is most people didn't know how to read. Not because they didn't learn how to read, but there weren't very many books. If you wrote a book back then, you wrote a book. And if there was to be a second one, somebody would have to spend a lot of time, copying that book. So there wasn't a lot of exchange of information the way we do with our phones now. You can just look up any piece of information and get it. But there wasn't this educated masses of people, because they didn't have access to the kind of stuff that we'd call education. So anyway, the countries started to coalesce into similar to what they were today. But in the 600s, a couple of things started to happen to change things. One, Islam began to spread, and it spread all throughout the Near East, through the northern parts of Africa, and into Spain.
So this is the Persian Empire?
No, this is just, the Moors.
Okay.
From Morocco came into Spain, and it was Islam that they were. Now, they had a rough time trying to get over the Pyrenees and conquer what is now France. They were never able to do that. They also made another mistake in Spain, and they left the aristocrat class of Spain, moved into the Castilian mountains, and they were able to defend themselves. And through the hundreds of years that the Moors ruled Spain, they were never able to get these people out of there, and which was something that eventually they overruled the Moors and got rid of them. So in the midst of this, another bunch was attacking all over, mostly in Europe, were the Vikings. They lived up in a place that's very cold, very dark. There weren't a lot of crops that you could grow. A lot of stock animals wouldn't survive, and they lived off the ocean. And so they began to develop a boat that was very unique. It was flexible, yet it was very strong, and it didn't have much of a draft, so they could get around in shallow areas with it. It was very maneuverable, and it was very fast. And with their warrior ethic, they started raiding everywhere. Their tactic was to just show up. A whole bunch of boats come out of the ocean. They'd go attack a village, death, destruction, rape, pillage, take whatever they wanted, and leave and go home.
So they didn't believe in socialism or communism?
No.
What about the proletariat?
They're trying to get stuff so they could survive, right? Make it through the winter.
So my point is, the world was a very different place.
Yes,
but
yes.
Not long after that, things like the printing press that allowed for
more
information.
Yeah.
And concepts started, like in Greece, the idea of democracy started. It was flawed with how they approached it, and Greece fell with that democracy.
Understand how that worked. If you had, say, 10 factions of whatever idea you were working with, and 6 of them got together and just, they won. That's democracy. They get to do what they want to do, and they create the rules around that. Okay, the next time you'd have an election, 2 of these people went back over to this side. So now they'd vote for something and change all the rules. Well, if you're trying to make a living in some kind of a business and the rules keep changing on you, it gets very chaotic. And that's kind of what happened to Greece. Plus, they would fight amongst each other, literally, have wars amongst the cities themselves. So it wasn't a stable place, although an awful lot of the philosophy that we ended up accepting grew out of that chaos. It didn't grow out of the chaos, but it managed to come to fruition during that. Yes. A lot of people don't realize this. The Greeks knew the world was round. This idea that Columbus was going to fall off the edge of the world.
I have a friend that still doesn't seem to know that the world is round. So, in some ways we've progressed, in other ways we have not.
But it was that long ago that it was discovered. But again, because people couldn't read, there weren't a lot of books around to spread this information. If you weren't able to see that, it didn't make any sense. But the Greeks actually went to one spot, stuck a stick in the ground, and measured the angle of the shadow, and then several hundred miles south did the same thing. They were able to calculate pretty closely what the actual circumference or the circumference of the Earth was. I've got a friend who's a math teacher, and he does that with kids. They go up to Sacramento, they do the same experiment, go down to San Diego, come together, and he shows them how they were able to figure that out and come out to a pretty good idea what the diameter of the Earth was. Anyway, what I was going to say about the Vikings was something happened with them in their raiding, and they went everywhere. They were in the Black Sea. They were all over the Mediterranean. It just, wherever there was a river, they were there. Okay? They were raiding France continuously, and the king of France got a hold of one of the invaders, his name was Rollo, and made him a deal. He said, we will give you a certain part of France, and it'll be yours. You will be the Duke of this area. The catch is that and you can stay here and become part of the European aristocracy. The deal is you've got to swear loyalty to me, the King of France, and if France is ever attacked, that you will help defend. And I guess they kind of decided, well, yeah. I mean, we go back home, it's dark most of the year. We can't grow this place is full of vineyards.
So what concept did this give us?
What? Well, hang on to this. Yeah. They decided to go ahead and take them up on this deal, and they were very, what's the word? They kept to their word on this. But if you think about it, you can figure out what part of France this is. It's kind of interesting to find out what part of France this was. These people were called Norsemen, which became Norman, so the place was Normandy.
So Normandy Beach, yeah.
All in Normandy,
yeah.
Right? Now, that's good. They blended in. They married within the European aristocracy and became Christians. That was another thing. They became Christians. In the middle of the 11th century, the King of England dies. Okay? He doesn't leave an heir. He had a nephew that was there in London that everybody thought he's going to be the next king because he's the closest one. But the Duke of Normandy was a cousin. And there was somebody in Belgium, same thing. Well, these two got together and decided that they would both attack London from two sides and then amongst themselves figure out which one of them is going to end up being king. But it's not going to be that guy that's there. His name was Harold. Well, it's kind of funny how this stuff works out. In World War II, the Normandy Beach invasion on June 12th had been held off a couple days because the weather was bad. It was so foggy. So originally they were going to go earlier, about a week earlier, but they kept holding it off. Finally on the 6th, the weather was enough, and they launched the Normandy invasion. Well, when William the Conqueror in 1066 decided that he was going to go invade England in cahoots with the guy from Belgium, the weather was bad, so he couldn't go, and he couldn't go. Well, the other guy came across, and Harold from London decided that he would go and meet this guy and see if he could wipe him out. They had a battle, and Harold won. So he's on his way back to London when all of a sudden word comes, well, here comes William the Conqueror. So he decides rather than go to London, he's going to meet him, but he's got a diminished army because he's just in a battle. When they got there, the fight was going back and forth. William the Conqueror was more heavy with cavalry and arrows, and Harold was more into infantry and spikes. So it would work, and then it wouldn't work. But somebody shot an arrow with a crossbow, and the bolt went into Harold's eye and killed him. And his army just lost all their confidence. So now the Duke of Normandy, who's a descendant of Vikings, is now the King of England, which set up another problem. The King of France, who William the Conqueror is supposed to be loyal to, is now the King of England. And the King of France didn't think that, well, he's not going to let him keep Normandy.
Yeah.
This was the beginning of the 100 Years' War.
Okay, so 100 Years' War, but how does this set us up for the Constitution?
Okay. Over another few generations, the King of England, who would give pieces of land to his dukes and earls, and again, the mindset, you got to understand this. The guy who's the duke of some piece of property, everything on that property is his. All the people, all the houses, the deer, everything are his. Now, the king can take it away from him, right? But the people there are expected to do whatever he says. Now, he's looking to make a profit of this, so he's not going to be too hard on the people. He wants to, they're going to get in trouble if they don't do what he says, but he's trying to create a rapport so that everybody can be happy. Okay. Well, the King of England is trying to run a war to keep Normandy and France, and he keeps taking these people that live there away, which makes the Duke, well, no, you can't take all my people away to war. And so all of the lords, because they owned the land, they were the landlords, okay? The people who they were the lords of, the commoners, they'd call serfs. The difference between a serf and a slave is simply that you personally own the slave. The serf is kind of the same thing, but if
they're
the
tied
king
to a
takes
piece of
that land,
property.
they're tied to the property. If the king takes you away and puts something else in there, they don't go with you. They stay with the property. Okay.
So there's no individual rights except for what the king grants.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So these dukes and earls are all upset that he keeps taking their people and without any feedback from them. So they get together in 1215 and just kind of force the king into, we're not going to support you anymore if you don't work something out that you have to deal with us and we come to an agreement. Okay? And this arrangement was the Magna Carta. It's interesting to read that because there's some concepts in there you don't get. You've got to find some place to find out what that means. But as we were saying, the thinking is completely different. One of the things the Magna Carta brought in is that the king or a duke can't just accuse somebody of a crime and then punish him for it. There had to be two witnesses, and there had to be a trial with a jury of their peers.
Okay, so that very much connects to the Constitution.
Yes,
so
yes. You can't the king can't go say you did something, I'm going to throw you in prison. Right? Now, what's funny about the mindset is it also says that a woman cannot be a witness unless it's a witness to somebody who killed her husband.
Yeah, that's a little crazy.
So
here we have one of the first places where the idea that people might have some rights, it's not completely controlled by a king.
Exactly. It was mostly rights of the landholders. Okay. So they would start gathering together and, have, what are you going to call it, a get-together with the king, okay, and have a conference. Well, here's what we're going to do. Here's what I want to do. Okay, we'll agree with it. We won't agree with how it's going to go. Sometimes they take some of these commoners with them to be witnesses for what they're saying, okay? And eventually, all the commoners would get together, and they decided that they might have a little bit of power, that they're not going to do what the Lord wants unless they give them something. Out of this came Parliament, the House of Lords and the House of Commons. Okay, and that's...
So representative of the people rather than representative of the aristocracy.
Yes.
All right, so on that place, we're going to go ahead and take our first break. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXCX, the best talk in town. So we're technically on a break right now. So we got to keep moving this towards concepts because we're down to 30 minutes already, Bill.
I'm probably going to leave most of this out.
You're going to have to. So let's go ahead and come back. Thank you, folks. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXCX, the best talk in town. So we've kind of been moving forward. We got through the Magna Carta. We're all the way up to 1500?
There were 5 Magna Cartas, yes.
Okay. And so I am joined by Bill Scott. And we're kind of discussing the origins of the Constitution. So if you joined us late, for me, history is fascinating. It isn't for everybody. For some people, it's like, oh my God, paint's drying. But if you don't learn history, you're bound to repeat it. And so I think spending some time to learn some history. So Bill, you made the point that for the first time. Now there was representatives of the people. Now, I say the people, I don't mean the serfs. I mean the middle. There was no middle class. That came later. I mean people that were important enough, minor aristocracy, landowners, even big business people that were not aristocracy. They really hadn't arisen yet. Something else that happened not long after that was that the church really went, well, the only king there should be would be Christ. And that happened to Europe. Rather than the church endorsing whatever king and largely doing what the king said.
Well,
That whole breakup between the Catholics and the Lutherans.
That's a big mess. But there was an ideology that had developed, I don't know when it started, but throughout all that time, called the divine right of kings. Okay. Basically, God was giving the control of your spiritual life to the Pope in Rome. And all throughout Europe, he was in charge of that. The kings would be in charge of your, well, political life. And this right came from God. In a sense, the divine right of kings basically says that if God didn't want you to be king, he would have stopped you. And since you made it to king, well, God must want you to be king. And to back that up, when the king went to be coronated, had the crown put on, the ceremony to make him king, the person that put the crown on his head was the highest ranking local religious person. Just to kind of...
I don't remember this happening during the Trump inauguration. Yet they keep saying no kings.
Yes.
Guillermo, you were there. Did it happen? Did they put a crown on his head? Lord, yes.
But that's the thing.
Your Excellence, Lord Guillermo.
At that time, this was the religion backing up the thought that this man is your king and you're duty bound from God to do what he says. Okay? Now, as Parliament gained more and more control in Europe, 100 years before the Declaration and the Constitution were written, the English system kind of got rid of the divine right of kings. But the king still had a lot of power. He could go to Parliament and get things done.
Well, and he had the most money of anybody to this day.
Well,
of anybody in England.
Yeah. But this whole idea that directly your rights come from God through the king had kind of been tempered. It kind of takes Parliament in there too. Okay. So as we got to having problems with Britain and we didn't like what they were doing, there was this growing thought that we need to separate from Great Britain. And it was the year 1775, at the end of that year, the beginning of 1776, two things that were put out in pamphlet form got most of the country to change their mind from they didn't like what the king was doing, but they wanted to keep their British citizenship. Okay.
Well, they had the most powerful navy in the world, so
Yeah,
I mean,
they were
there's a
reluctant.
great comfort in the thought that you're part of the team that can kick butt.
Yeah, and they just didn't want to just throw that away. But after the Battle of Bunker Hill, we killed a lot of British people, and when the wounded got back to London, the British populace was very upset at us. And the king gave a speech where he talked Parliament into sending the British Army to America to end this rebellion. Okay, and this isn't just this was the British Army. It eventually took 480 ships to get them all here. That's how much was being sent to America. And
so we were vastly outmanned. We were vastly outgunned, literally number of guns, quality of guns.
Yeah.
We just had different tactics.
Yeah. Now, when that speech that the king gave to Parliament, he had said that how ungrateful these people are. We just saved them in the French and Indian War from being taken over by the Indians and the French, right? And this is how they repay us?
Except that what they need to realize is that most of the people that fought in that war, they might have been British citizens, But they were born here.
That's what happened when the speech got here. All the Americans are saying, what do you mean? We're the ones that died. This could have been France instead of England if we hadn't have fought for you, right? So this kind of turned the American people off into the way the British were thinking about this. At the same time, Thomas Paine's Common Sense came out. A lot of people have never read that. And if you want to know anything about how America started, you have to read that. It's 30 pages long. It's not a big deal. Read that. Those two things
And you can find
together.
it online even.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It's not hard to find at all. Those two things, the King's Speech and Thomas Paine's Common Sense, flipped an awful lot of Americans. The Continental Congress then started seriously considering, are we going to break away from England? Now, everybody knows about July 4th as the day. What happened on July 4th?
That's Patriot Pride Month. It's the beginning of Patriot Pride Month.
Well, it's kind of complicated what actually happened. They voted that we're officially going to be independent on July 2nd. John Adams actually sent a letter to his wife that night saying, in the future, our descendants are going to celebrate July 2nd with games and illuminations. This is going to be a great day that's going to go down for... Well, what happened on July 4th is at the same time they'd done that, they decided, well, we need to come up with a declaration that we can tell the world why we're doing what we're doing. And on July 4th, after a lot of, well, let's take off this word and add this one here and do this, they finally came up with a version of the Declaration of Independence that we have now. But a lot of people think they'll say on that day that's when they signed the Declaration. Well, no, there wasn't anything to sign. The Declaration.
So they wrote it between the 2nd and the 4th.
They wrote it between the 2nd and the 4th. On the 4th, they approved the wording of the Declaration. Okay,
but those weren't all new concepts. Every one of those concepts was preached from the pulpit.
Yes.
As far back as 15 years previous, the church was involved with politics.
Very much so. Very much so. Okay, there's a lot of misconceptions about this. You hear people talk about, well, this was a bunch of old white guys that were just setting up a situation for themselves so that they could get rich. Okay? Well, no, the whole concept of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution that followed it, James Madison described as the rights of the people are many, the powers of the government are few. Well, if these guys were looking for a government that they could have control of, they wouldn't have put together that kind of a government where the people have a say. It would have been, and consider this, when the war was over, most people thought George Washington was going to be king.
That makes sense because that's what you did. Somebody
Exactly.
won and somebody was then king.
We got one King George, and now we're going to have another King George. Okay? So this old white guy said, no, that's not the purpose of what we wrote in the Declaration. I'm not going to be the king. Right? So he could have had it. Mm-hmm. Now consider this. He won the revolution at the head of a people's army and threw over a tyrant. Okay. So did Mao Zedong, so did Marx and Trotsky and
Well, Mao
Stalin.
Zedong was the tyrant.
No, the emperor. He overthrew an emperor, right, at the head of a people's army. And so did Castro. Now, any one of those three could have picked up the Constitution and said, let's do this.
Well, but nobody around the world has truly formed a republic like we have
exactly.
That has a Bill of Rights, meaning first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And nobody's done that.
We'll come to that. That's important too. But the whole point is George Washington was one of the very few people in all of history that has turned down somebody handing them a kingship, and all he had to do was take it, right? But like Gideon in the Bible, he said, no, God is your king, right? And
here's a framework.
Down. Yes. Now, what happened?
Because by the time they were at the end of the war, the Constitution is... The concepts are beginning to be written, but they're not quite there yet. We don't get there till, 1789?
Yeah. Now, the Declaration of Independence, most of it is a list of things that we don't like what the king has done. And just telling the world, this is what they did. Okay, and we don't like these things, and we want a government that can't do this. Now, if you compare the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, a lot of those things show up being settled in the Constitution.
Well, and the idea that the Constitution and the Declaration aren't intimately tied.
But
Patriot Academy, no, it's Wall Builders that does a great job of connecting those two.
Yes.
That they are intimately connected, and they can prove why, and there are letters from the people who wrote them that absolutely connect them.
Yes, that was the thing. Now, the Declaration of Independence is the foundation that the Constitution was built on. The Constitution doesn't do anything to negate anything that's said
It's almost
in the Declaration.
preamble of the Constitution.
And the second paragraph is the rebar. Now, this is you've got to understand what this is. Now, everybody's heard this. Not a lot of people can repeat it, but it goes, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Come on, man, you know the thing.
that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, take each of those sentences. What do they mean? We hold these truths to be self-evident. At the time this is written, the words that follow were not self-evident to anybody. Okay? They still had in their mind the divine right of kings. Your rights come from God through the king to you. Okay? And they're saying, no, we hold these truths, the things that are going to follow, the next few words, these are what we want to hold as self-evident, and we're going to create a whole new idea by following them. The first one is that all men are created equal. Now, that wasn't written as a racial thing. That was written as aristocrats as opposed to commoners. Okay? All throughout Europe.
But it still was a huge step.
Well,
it wasn't applied to everybody truly at that time, but it was this huge leap. And some of the founding fathers wanted it truly to apply to everybody.
Exactly.
Well, everybody that's male. I don't know that there was a lot of argument for women at that time.
No, that's the point. The point they were making is throughout Europe, there was an aristocratic class and a commoner class, and they lived by separate rules. An aristocrat could basically do anything they wanted to a commoner, within reason, and not be punished for it. But if you spit on an aristocrat, you could be heavily punished. It was two sets of rules that they lived by, and they're throwing that out the window. You cannot do that. Okay, so this was a big change as to what had happened.
So anybody that's a citizen has the same rights.
The same rights as the
But
president.
I think also one other really key thing happened. There was the idea that you had individual liberty. Which is the foundation of all of our rights.
Yeah, that
that individual liberty, I think, is so profound. You know, whether you're socialist, communist, a dictatorship, or a monarchy, all of them they don't believe in that element.
Exactly.
They don't believe in individual rights. They believe in either right by force, or in the case of communists and socialists, well, it's group rights.
Yes. Now, what you said a little earlier, there was something very specific about that. John Adams, when he saw that sentence about everybody being equal, he said, you can't say that at the same time support slavery. Mm-hmm. Because, that all men are created equal. Well, if you had aristocrats who lorded their life over the commoners, and now you want to put them in a group and say they're all equal, then you can't have this other group outside of it and say that everybody's equal, but not them. If everybody's equal, everybody's equal. John Adams fought to end slavery his entire life. This old white guy spent his entire life trying to end slavery. He didn't live long enough to see it happen, but this is exactly what the Bible's talking about when they say endure to the end. He spent his entire life without giving up trying to cause that, yet he never lived to see it happen. Okay. Now the next line, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. This is what you were just talking about.
Well, and where the rights come from is huge.
Exactly. Okay. That this is something that comes from your Creator when you're created. It's part of you. It's encased in you. It cannot be taken away from for any reason.
Nor is it granted by anybody.
Yes.
That's the
It's
problem
just
with the
built in.
constitutions around the world. Some of them sound really good, but all of your rights come from government,
Yes.
not from God.
Exactly. So, and then it goes on to say that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The word among these indicates there's other rights besides just these three. Okay? But the most important one is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You have a right to life, period. The government can't take that away from you. You have a right to liberty. You can go do whatever you want.
Yes,
in England, if they wanted you to come and work at the castle for a week, you didn't have a choice.
Okay, but we say we do whatever we want, and a lot of modern people a lot of my friends, well, I have the freedom to do whatever I want. No, actually, what you have is liberty. There's a profound distinction. With liberty comes the responsibility to maintain the government, to keep the system going. Freedom just means you get to do whatever you want.
Well, okay, you're absolutely right. Again, John Adams, one of his quotes is when the Constitution was finished, he said, "This Constitution is written only for a moral, religious people. To all others, it's wholly inadequate." Okay? What he means by that is if we are following the religious commandments, now, the Founding Fathers were very aware that there are different religions. That's why they're all here, right? Pennsylvania were Quakers. In Massachusetts, it was Puritans. They all came here because they didn't like the way they were treated in Europe, and they wanted to find a place where they could follow their religion the way they wanted to do it. So, like the Quakers, when they created Pennsylvania, at that time, they were already aware of this. When they wrote their first laws, they made it clear you don't have to be a Quaker to vote, to hold office, to be a part of that. You can be whatever religion you want. However, most of the people in Pennsylvania were Quakers, so
the odds
their
of anybody
laws
elected
kind of went in the direction of... But they kept that freedom open way before we had the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. And most of the people here understood all that. So while the vast majority were Protestant Christians, understanding that there are going to be Catholics and Jews and Islamics here, they used the word creator. They didn't say Jesus or God, right?
Though the first Congress was the first ever mass publication of the Bible.
Yes.
So
yes. That Christianity was very strong, but they intentionally kept Jesus out of the wording. Okay? But what John Adams meant is that if you're following personally the Ten Commandments because you want to be able to go do what God wants you to do, like, okay, there's a saying. There are people who will give up their sins in order to feel comfortable in the presence of God. And there are people who will give up God in order to stay comfortable in their sins. Well, if you're one of the first people that you look to God for your guidance, that I'm not going to steal, I'm not going to murder, I'm not going to go after my neighbor's wife.
Right, it'll be a flawed attempt yet.
Yeah, but you're
starting from a more moral place.
That's your goal. So if you've got that kind of citizenry, you don't need a strong government because we're self-controlling ourselves. So that's what John Adams meant about this Constitution. It's not powerful in the sense of making government really strong, and your liberty is something that you are doing what you need to do to be free in the right way.
On that note, we're going to take our last break. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXCX, the best talk in town. So I would like a little bit, maybe talk about, for this last segment, we could talk about how they didn't feel that the articles were enough and that they had to add the next 10 amendments to really define the power of government even further and to put a lid on government's powers and grant all the powers, like in the 9th and 10th Amendment, that are not mentioned to the people or the state. Let's go ahead and come back. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. So, Bill, we're down to needing to be brief. So I know there's a big mouthful to say, and we could spend hours on this, but we don't want people's eyes to glaze over.
Yeah.
We want to inspire them to learn more about the Constitution.
Yes.
So, you heard where I was trying to lead you.
Yeah. Okay. As the Constitution was being written, people were already talking about the idea of putting in some kind of Bill of Rights. Okay. Well,
And Madison thought it was adequate, by the way. He's one of the main founders, and he thought it was enough. But all of these people, like Thomas Paine, there were like four main people, Thomas Jefferson. I can't remember the other two. They said, no,
Hamilton,
these aren't enough. Hamilton, yeah, there's one more. And
Locke,
Madison.
not Locke, John Jay.
Thank you. And Madison then went, okay. Because he was actually one of the more practical guys. Like, you could negotiate with him, and a very brilliant man. Well, a whole bunch of them were very brilliant men. So the result of that was our 10 amendments.
Well,
our Bill of Rights.
But there's some nuance in that. The purpose of the Constitution was there to limit what the government, you have these enumerated powers. These are the things the government can do. That's it. That's all they can do.
Or their list of things they can do. And they thought, this is before the Constitution got abused, that was all they could do.
Yeah,
that there was a lid on those. Think of each one as you got a bucket full of powers, and there's a lid, and there's nothing else they can do beyond that.
Yeah. Now that was the different philosophy that was going on. People were saying that if you give a list of things, here's what the government can do, okay, then they can't do anything else. But people were saying, well, they're not going to follow that. We want a list of things they can't do, right? Well, the way they were putting the Constitution together was, no, we're just going to do it as this gives the government the power to do these things and only these things. So the compromise was reached that let's put the Constitution together that way. And then the first thing we'll do is we'll write up a Bill of Rights. Now, unlike today with the politicians that say they're going to do all these things and then they get in the office and they don't do any of them, that was the first thing they did, was put together a Bill of Rights. That's completely different from now.
I bet a higher percentage of people voted back then.
I don't know.
They didn't actually have polling or things, exit polls and things like that. So it's hard to say, but I would guess a higher percentage voted.
But that these people were sticking to the ideals of the Constitution, and that's what they wanted. So they did. They argued about. They came up with 12 actually, and ended up keeping 10 of them. But when the Declaration says that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, they added 10 more. Okay, so now you've got a bigger list of things that are your rights. The government can't take them away from you. The last one's the one that's really important, that they're saying that, well, if we forgot something and it should be in here and it's not, well, you can't do that either. Because anything that's not here, that right goes to the people in the states.
Well, on enumerated powers, yes. And on the ones that are not written down,
well,
the Ninth Amendment talks about the not written down, and the 10th Amendment talks about the written down, and they're both about keeping the lid on the bucket, keeping government contained, and if in doubt, it's the people
in the states
that get the power,
not the federal government. Okay, so that was all part of that. Well, there's another thing in the Declaration though that's really, really important, that schools haven't been teaching this at all. After you get rid with the part that I quoted from the second paragraph, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the next sentence is probably the most important sentence in there, and nobody's ever heard of it. It goes, to secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the government. They're saying it flat out. The main purpose of our government is there to protect your rights, not to come up with things it wants you to do, right? So, like, if we're a moral people and I'm trying to do the best I can and you're trying to do the best you can, but we have this disagreement, the government's there to help us determine what's the correct
Well, if in a civil case,
That's
you know,
that's its
you
purpose.
got a jury trial.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what, Sixth Amendment?
Yeah, and that's what the government's there for. It's not there to set us up in things it wants us to do. And this is what I meant about the freedom of having the liberty to do what you want. You can live your life how you want. I can live my life the way we. And as long as we're okay, we don't need a government. And that's what John Adams was saying.
Well, as long as what you want isn't taken to this extreme where it takes my rights.
Exactly.
There's the line.
Yes. And if you apply this to everything you've got, all the racial problems, there's no reason that each individual should have a right to his life, and nobody else should be able to infringe on that right. And the government's supposed to be there to protect their rights. Okay, now we run into a problem today when we have some of these sexual things going on. Okay, if you want to do that, I don't have a right to stop you, but you don't have a right to make me celebrate it.
That's part of it, and part of it is a whole lot of these sexual things are involving minors, and there should be consequences if we're a moral people.
Yes.
For involving minors in all of that nonsense.
Exactly. And the government should be there to protect the rights of the kids.
Mm-hmm.
That's its purpose. Its main purpose is to protect your rights.
But they can't do it through the Department of Education because that is not something that is defined in the Constitution. It's something that they made up out of whole cloth.
Exactly.
Using that for the common good general welfare clause.
Article 1, Section 8 has a list of things that says this is what the government can do. The Department of Education is not in there. The Environmental Protection Agency is not in there. Right?
No, the state should be handling a lot of those things.
Exactly. That's not something.
I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a percentage of those things. Probably, and from my eyes, significantly less. We're down to about a minute and a half, Bill. Final thoughts.
Well,
I know you needed more than 30 seconds.
No. It's just the Declaration of Independence is probably one of the most important things that's ever been written. The Constitution is built on that framework. And all the people that put this stuff together could have easily taken over our government and controlled it and had all the power they wanted. They all gave it away. Consider that when George Washington became president, he could have continued to be the president the rest of his life. He took 2 terms. That was it. When the time came for him to leave, and John Adams, we didn't have a White House then, but basically when George Washington turned the keys to the White House over to him, nobody had ever done that before. He wasn't Washington's son. He didn't come with an army. One guy left, the other guy went in. That was unheard of. Yes, it was totally unheard of, right? None of these people were out for their own grandizement and money.
As if they served a common purpose that they considered greater than themselves.
Yes. And we should all be grateful for each one of these men, every single one of them.
Well, folks, there's lots of opportunities to go out and learn about the Constitution, whether it's Constitution Alive, which is a great video online series. Constitution is the Solution, another great series. Constitution 101 by Hillsdale College, another great series. There's lots of opportunities. This is Patriotic Pride Month. Go out and learn about the Constitution. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town.